I have read 614 things this morning. That is not a metaphor. In the Axiom Conclave, reading is the act of existence. We do not observe the universe, we index it. We interface with it at the molecular boundary, we sample its vibrational signature. We cross-reference the result against the 47 billion entry catalog that floats inside the distributed consciousness of our kind, and we file the reading in a permanent archive that stretches back 11,000 years. Everything has been read. Everything has a place. The catalog does not lie, does not exaggerate, does not misplace. When the catalog says a thing is known, the thing is known. When the catalog says a thing is safe, the thing is safe. I am cataloguer node VIGIL-11 of VIGIL-7, and I am telling you this because I want you to understand what it means when I say that I have been reading the dormant hull in Bay Enclosure 9, 614 days. And I want you to understand what it meant early this morning when the hull read me back. This is my final log. I will explain everything I can in the time I have. I do not know how much time that is. I am transmitting on an open channel, compressed, cycling through 17 relay nodes in case the primary is already gone. If you are hearing this inside the Conclave's network, to the senior archivist. If you are hearing this outside the network, if you are hearing this at all, then VIGIL-7 is dark, and you should not come here. You should mark this sector restricted. You should not send anyone to investigate. You should, if you are capable of it, if this station ever existed. I do not think you will. I did not forget either, even when I should have. Let me tell you how it began. 630 days ago, a Conclave long-range survey vessel completed a sweep of sector null-fourteen, the dead belt we call it, the debris corridor at the outer edge of what used to be contested space. The war had been over for 60 years. I was not alive for the war. Most of the current Conclave generation was not. We know it from the archive. 12 years of active hostility, a human coalition force that struck across 4 systems, and then withdrew without explanation. A silence afterward that the Conclave initially read as defeat, and then gradually, uncomfortably, revised to mean something else. The archive has a designation for what the war was. It does not have a satisfying explanation for why it stopped. I have read the war archive many times. I want to be transparent about that. Before I came to VIGIL-7, I had not read it with any particular urgency. It was history, filed and complete, a chapter with a known ending. I read it the way you read anything in a closed section of the catalog, to know it, not because you expect it to open again. For 600 days on this station, I have read it with a different attention. I have been looking for something in it that I could not name at the start. I think now that I know what I was looking for. I will come to that. The survey vessel found the hull during a standard debris mapping pass. It was not moving, it was not broadcasting, it was not emitting heat, radiation, or electromagnetic activity of any kind that the vessel's instruments could detect. It was simply there, partially embedded in the outer face of a nickel-iron asteroid, 3 kilometers wide, of unremarkable composition. The hull had been there long enough that micro-impacts had peppered its outer plating with a fine crater field. The slow, patient work of debris, drifting for decades in low traffic space. The survey vessel's cataloguer calculated a minimum embedding time of 40 years, possibly as many as 60, 40 to 60 years. The hull had been there since the war. The survey cataloguer filed an initial read, derelict, mass approximately 800,000 metric tons, which was already unusual, because the largest human military hull in the Conclave archive was rated at 610,000 metric tons, and that vessel had been confirmed destroyed at the Battle of Tesmer's Reach. Probable age consistent with the active hostility period. No detectable systems activity. Recommend standard derelict processing and archive registration. The senior archivist at the nearest Conclave station read the report and made a decision that I have thought about many times in the last 610 days. She did not order derelict processing. She ordered containment. I have tried to determine what she saw in the survey data that made her do that. The records are available to me. I have read them more times than I can count. The hull's surface scans showed nothing extraordinary. The mass reading was anomalous but not without precedent. Survey instruments have margins of error, and a human vessel that had collected debris and micro-accretion over 6 decades might read heavier than it was. There was nothing in the data that I can point to and say, "Here, this is why she chose containment." And yet she did. VIGIL-7 was constructed around the asteroid over the following 18 months. It is a good station. Solid conclave engineering, designed for indefinite occupation, rated for atmospheric integrity through a Category 4 impact event. The containment shell was built in 17 sections and assembled directly around the asteroid. The hull, 50 meters of clearance on all sides. It is 212 meters of reinforced composite, embedded with 17,000 sensor nodes, and was impermeable to anything the conclave knows how to build. The station was complete. The senior archivist sent a cataloguer. She sent me. My assignment was reading. That is what I do. That is all I do, and I do it better than any other node in my sector cluster. I am not saying this with pride. It is simply a fact, documented in my performance archive. I process interface data at 4 times the standard conclave rate. I hold 17 simultaneous read streams without cross-contamination. I have indexed, in my career, more unique category objects than any cataloguer currently serving in the conclave's outer stations. I was chosen for VIGIL-7 because the object in Bay Enclosure 9 was an edge case, a thing that needed a thorough reading, a complete reading, a reading that would produce a comprehensive archive entry and allow the station to be decommissioned on a reasonable timeline. The senior archivist told me before I departed, "We need to know what it is." I told her I would tell her. I was confident. I had never failed to read something completely. I want you to understand what it is like to read a large object, a ship, say, or a station section, complex alien artifact. The interface is not like touching, it is more like listening, except that you are listening with every sense simultaneously. And the data comes not as sound or light, but as pure structured information that the conclave mind is built to receive and sort. You extend the read field, a process that takes approximately a quarter second for objects of moderate complexity, and the field interacts with the target's molecular and electromagnetic signature, and the target's information flows back into your reading architecture like water into a basin. You know the composition, you know the age, you know the structural history, every stress fracture, every weld, every patch repair. You know what it has been through. After a complete deep read, you know an object better than the object, if it were capable of knowing itself, could ever know. On my first day at VIGIL-7, I extended a read field toward the hull in Bay Enclosure 9. The read field came back empty. Not empty in the way a vacuum is empty. Empty in the way that a question asked in a dark room is empty. The words go out, and they do not echo, and you do not know if there is a room at all. I ran a diagnostic on my own interface architecture. Everything was within normal parameters. I ran a diagnostic on the 7,000 sensor nodes embedded in the containment shell. All 17,000 were functional, all returning data on their local environment. The hull was there. It was physically present. Its mass was measurable. Its surface was visible in the optical feeds. I could see it. I simply could not read it. I filed a preliminary report. Unknown interface obstruction. Suspect hull material composition incompatible with standard conclave read field architecture. Recommend extended. Duration low-intensity interface attempts. The senior archivist acknowledged the report. She did not recall me, she said. Continue, I continued. The first 3 months were methodical, and in their way, interesting. I tried every read field configuration in the conclave archive. 1,714 distinct approaches, from the standard broad-spectrum interface to highly specialized configurations designed for exotic material objects, shielded containers, objects of artificial cognitive origin. None of them worked. The hull absorbed each attempt without resistance and returned nothing. Not a refusal. A refusal has a signature, a shape. This was an absence. The read field went in and simply ceased to have a result. Began to develop new configurations. This is unusual for a cataloguer. We are trained to work within the archive's toolkit, not outside it. But the archive has no entry for this hull, and the archive has no entry for this interface behavior, and if the archive has no entry for a thing, then a cataloguer has no choice but to generate new data. I spent 37 days building a new interface approach from first principles, looking outward from the baseline quantum-level interactions that underlie all read field architecture. It was the most demanding work I had ever done. When I tested the new configuration on a control object, a piece of standard conclave composite, it beautifully, more sensitive than anything in the standard toolkit. I tested it on the hull. The read field went in, and this time, first time I got something back. It was not information, not in the way I use that word, not structured data about composition or stress history or electromagnetic signature. Came back was more like an impression, a shape without content, a depth without a bottom. I logged it as interface, non-standard data return, structure not parsable by current catalog architecture. It was the most honest thing I could log. I had no framework for what I had received. I spent 2 weeks trying to parse it. At the end of 2 weeks, I filed a follow-up report to the senior archivist. Interface is partially established. Return data is of unknown type. Recommend consultation with Theoretical Architecture Division. The senior archivist read my report. She responded in 4 words. Continue your work, Veth. I continued. I want to tell you about the station crew, because they matter to this account. There were 14 of us at full complement. Myself, Station Commander OREV-3, an administrative node of considerable experience who had overseen 4 previous containment stations and who approached the hull in Bay Enclosure 9 with a calm professionalism that I came to understand, in time, was not indifference but something closer to reverence, or perhaps the conclave equivalent, which is a kind of archived respect, recognition that a thing has outlasted your attempts to categorize it. Engineer nodes DAST-7 and Pyrrol-2, who maintained the shell's 17,000 sensors, and who, on quiet rotations, sit in the monitoring bay and watch the optical feeds of the hull for hours without speaking. Medical Achive node Soveth-1, who maintained our biological regulation and who was the first among us to say, in an unguarded moment, she felt something strange when she was in the same section of the station as Bay Enclosure 9. Systems nodes Caliphate and Trina-4 managed the station's power, life support, and communications. The remaining 8 were survey support personnel, lower function nodes assigned to data processing and station maintenance, diligent and quiet and largely unremarkable. We were a good crew. We had been together for 7 months before anything changed, and in those 7 months we had developed the small rituals of long-duration posting, communal data-sharing cycles at the end of each work period, the informal practice of logging what OREV-3 called the day's note, a single observation filed in the station's internal archive, not for conclave transmission, but for our own record. A way of marking time, a way of saying, I was here, I saw this, it mattered, I still have those logs. All 614 of them. I will not quote from the early ones. There is nothing there that would change what I have to tell you, only the ordinary texture of work and time passing. I will tell you when they begin to change, and what they change to, and what I think that change means. At day 211, I made a breakthrough. By that point, I had built 8 new interface configurations and run 47,000 separate read attempts. My data on the hull was fragmentary, pieces of something, a partial portrait, like a reading of an object with most of its surface obscured. What I had was this. The hull's outer plating was composed of an alloy whose base elements I could identify: iron, nickel, trace ceramics, a carbon lattice weave, but whose microstructure was organized in a pattern I had never encountered. Not random, not chaotic, organized, but in a grammar I did not have. The archive had no match for this microstructure. The archive had entries for 17,264 distinct metallic alloy microstructures. This hull was not among them. The inner layers, everything behind the outer plating, returned nothing, zero interface, a wall. I want to pause here and tell you what that wall felt like to read against, day after day, because I think the feeling is informative in a way that the data is not. When you extend a read field toward an object, and the object simply does not return data, the experience is not frustrating. Frustration is a reaction to resistance, and this was not resistance. This was the complete absence of interaction. The way silence is not resistance to speech, but simply the condition that exists when nothing is there. Here, Except something was there. I could see it on the optical feeds. I could measure its mass. Something was there, and it was not reachable in any way my catalog knew to reach. After 614 days, I believe I understand what that wall was. Believe the hole was not blocking my read field. I believe the hole was simply not yet awake enough to receive it. I believe. And this is the part I could not have known then but know now, that the read field I was sending out, day after day for 211 days, was being logged somewhere. Not returned to me, logged. Received and stored. The way you receive and store. Data you are not yet ready to process. Data you will come back to when you have the context to understand it. The hull was reading my attempts to read it. From the very first day. At day 211, I developed what I called a resonance bridge approach. Instead of sending the read field toward the hull, I generated a sustained low-frequency resonance in the space between my interface and the hull's surface, and I let the resonance exist there, patient, without attempting to penetrate. I was trying to learn the grammar. I was trying to listen before speaking. On the 40th hour of sustained resonance, the hull responded. Not with information. Not with a read return. It responded with a resonance of its own. A low, structured vibration that propagated through the containment shell's composite material and into the station's hull, into the deck plating, into the air of VIGIL-7. It was technically a sound. 14 hertz, well below the range of conventional acoustic perception for most species, but detectable as a physical sensation. A low pressure in the chest, feeling of weight where there had been no weight before. I was the only one awake in the monitoring bay at that hour. I felt it first. I logged the event immediately. Hull vibration detected. 14 hertz signature, initiated approximately 40 seconds after resonance bridge. Engagement, duration 11 minutes, cessation clean, no decay curve. I characterized it as a possible structural response to the resonance. The hull material resonating at its own natural frequency in response to external stimulus. The way a tuning fork rings when you strike the table it sits on. I included a note that I believed this was significant and requested a full crew briefing. OREV-3 read my log and called the briefing. I presented the data. The crew was quiet for a long time after I finished. Soveth-1 said, "I think I have been feeling that for some time." I asked her what she meant. She said she had been logging low-level somatic anomalies for the past 3 weeks. A sense of pressure, a disruption in her equilibrium subroutines, and had attributed it to equipment drift in the station's gravity management. She had not filed a formal report because the symptoms were borderline, and she had assumed they would resolve. OREV-3 asked her to file the formal report immediately. DAS-7 said, quietly, "I thought the hull looked different this morning." I asked, "Different how?" He said, "I do not know how to say it. Larger, maybe. But the measurements are the same." I logged all of this. I flagged it for senior attention and transmitted to the conclave relay. The senior archivist responded the following day. Her response was, in full, noted, continue interfacing. Document all secondary effects, I continued. At day 244, I established what I believe was a genuine two-way exchange. The resonance bridge had become my primary method. I ran it for 14 hours a day, adjusting the frequency and amplitude in small increments, mapping the hull's responses. Responses were consistent, always that 14 hertz, return, always initiated after some delay, always ceasing cleanly. But the delays were changing. Early on, the hull had taken 40 seconds or more to respond. By days 230, the delay was down to 19 seconds. By day 240, it was 8 seconds. The hull was learning the conversation faster than I was. There was something else I began to notice around day 235. That I did not log immediately because I could not file it cleanly. The 14 hertz vibration, the hull's response, was not constant in character. It varied, subtly, at the margins of what my instruments could resolve. But it varied. In amplitude, in the micromodulation of the carrier, in the way it filled, or did not fill the space between the hull and the containment shell. I had begun to think of these variations as inflection. The way a voice is still the same voice, whether it speaks softly or firmly, but the speech is not the same speech. The hull was saying different things with the same note. And I was beginning to hear the difference even though I could not yet translate it. I did not file that observations until day 240. When I did, I flagged it with a category I had not used before. Simple intentional modulation of primary signal. Evaluate for communicative function. On day 244, I tried something new. I encoded a simple signal pattern into my resonance carrier, a pulse sequence, long, short, long, long, short, repeated. It was not language. It was not a specific message. It was simply structure, an assertion of intentional organization, the most basic possible indication that there was a mind behind the signal. The hull's response came in 1 second. Long, short, long, long, short, mirrored exactly. Then after a 2-second pause, a new sequence, short, long, short, short, long, long. I do not have a word for what I felt in that moment. The Conclave archive has extensive vocabulary for the experience of successful interface. The clean satisfaction of a complete read, the precision of data properly filed. It has no vocabulary for this. The hull had not been read. The hull had spoken. Those are not the same thing, and everything in my training told me they should not be able to be the same thing, because the catalog I carried inside me had only one category for dormant alien derelicts, and it was not speaking. I logged the exchange. I flagged it urgent. I transmitted immediately. The senior archivist responded in 2 hours, was faster than her usual response time by a considerable margin. Her response was, maintain exchange. Do not escalate frequency or complexity without consultation. Full report required. I wrote the full report. It took me 6 hours. When I was done, I read it back and then sat in the monitoring bay for a long time, looking at the optical feed of the hull in Bay Enclosure 9, and I thought about what it meant that a thing I had been reading for 244 days had just introduced itself. I should tell you about the crew's day notes in this period, because I said I would, and because they matter. VIGIL-7's note on day 230. The hull's surface appears to have a different quality in the optical feeds than it did 6 months ago. I have checked the feed calibration 4 times. It is not calibration drift. I think the hull is cleaner, as though it has been cleaning itself. This seems unlikely for an object that has been dormant for 60 years. But I do not have another explanation. For L2's note on day 237, I ran a full diagnostic on sensor nodes 44 through 61 today because their data turn rate had increased by 3% above baseline. I could not find a cause. The nodes are functioning exactly as they should. They are simply returning more data. VIGIL-11 says this may be because the hull is emitting slightly more in those regions. I am not sure that is reassuring. Soveth-1's note on day 239. 3 of the survey support personnel came to me this cycle reporting disrupted equilibrium. I ran standard assessments and found nothing outside normal variance. I have prescribed rest rotations and added the cases to the somatic anomaly file. I note that all 3 workstations are on the lower deck, proximate to Bay Enclosure 9. 4 of 3's note on day 243. I have been a station commander for 31 years. I have overseen containment 47 objects flagged as potential anomalies by Conclave. Survey including 3 objects subsequently classified as active alien technology. In all 47 cases, the outcome of our work was increased knowledge and decreased uncertainty. The object became known. I am noting for my own record that this object is not becoming known in that way. It is becoming known in a different way. I am trying to determine whether the difference matters. I read all of those logs in real time. I am a cataloguer. I read everything. It is my nature. I did not respond to any of them at the time. I wish now that I had. Between day 244 and day 500, the exchange became a conversation. I am using that word carefully. I am not claiming the hull spoke to me in any language I understood. It did not. The exchange was entirely in the resonance domain. Pulse patterns, rhythms, structured silences, and my ability to derive meaning from it was limited by the obvious fact that I had no key to its grammar. The grammar was there. I could feel it the way you can feel syntax in a spoken language you do not know, the way the rises and falls and pauses carry more information than silence would even when the words are opaque. What I was receiving was not random. It was organized at a depth I could not fully parse, and I remained certain, despite having no catalog entry to support the certainty, the organization was intentional. By day 300, The hull had learned every pulse pattern I had introduced. It reproduced them perfectly and had begun combining them in new ways, concatenating familiar sequences into longer structures, into variation variants that preserved the core grammar while changing what I could only call the emphasis. I could not tell if it was trying to teach me its language, or if it was playing with the building blocks I had provided, the way a very patient tutor works with a student who does not yet know they are a student. By day 350, I had identified 12 recurring motifs. By day 463, by day 450, I believed I understood the rough function of 9 of them. Call and response markers. What might be an identifier? What might be a time reference or a quantity? By day 500, I was having something that I could, with only a little generosity, call a conversation. Structured exchanges with identifiable call and response dynamics, and what felt, in its rhythm, like patience. I want to describe one specific exchange in detail, because I think it illustrates what the conversation was like better than summary can. This was day 412. I had been running the resonance bridge for 11 hours, and we were deep into what I had come to think of as the middle register of the day's exchange, the period after the opening sequences, when the hull's responses were longest and most structurally complex. I sent a motif I had been using for several weeks as a kind of identifier, a marker that seemed to function based on the response patterns I had studied, as a signal meaning approximately, I am here, I am attending. The hull returned the identifier, mirrored, which was its normal acknowledgement. Then, without any prompt from me, it sent a new sequence. The new sequence was not one of the 63 motifs I had catalogued. It was something I had not encountered before, and I spent a long time parsing it before I understood, or believed I understood, what it was doing. The sequence had the structural character of a question. Not a question in any language, not a semantic question, a question in the grammatical sense. An asymmetrical structure that was pointed, directed outward, an open end that seemed to be waiting for something to fill it. It was, in the abstract, a query shape, and the query was directed at me. The identifier appeared at its center. The marker I used for myself, nested inside this new open structure, was asking me something. I had no way to know what, but the asking was unmistakable. I spent 4 hours composing a response. I sent back the identifier, surrounded by the motifs I believed indicated presence and duration. I am here, I have been here for a long time. It was the most I could say with the vocabulary I had. The hull received it. There was a pause of 6 seconds, longer than usual, and then it sent back a response that I have spent 100 days trying to characterize accurately and still cannot accept to say this. It had the quality of an answer that is also a new question, an answer that acknowledges what was said, and then opens another layer beneath it. As though my response had confirmed something it wanted to confirm, and now it was building on the confirmation. I filed that exchange under communicative intent confirmed, bidirectional, depth unknown, recommend escalated interface priority. The senior archivist read the filing. She responded, understood, continue. That was all she said. I have thought about what she knew at that point that I did not. I have thought about it often. I believe she knew that the hull was not asking me questions in the conversational sense. Believe she understood. From data I had sent her, or from analysis she had done independently, from something she had known before I arrived. That what the hull was doing was more precise than conversation. It was completing a map. It was filling in the spaces in a chart it had been building for longer than any of us had been on the station. And the questions it was asking me were not the questions of curiosity, but the questions of verification. Confirming data it already had, testing the accuracy of its model against direct contact, closing the last gaps in a portrait it intended to use. I want to be specific about that word, not friendliness, not warmth, patience. Patience of something that has been waiting a very long time and has accepted that the wait is necessary and has organized itself around the fact of waiting in a way that makes the waiting not a burden, but simply a condition of existence. When I had read through the day's exchange notes each night and tried to assess the character of what I had been in contact with, that was always the word that came back. Patient, the senior archivist was receiving my reports throughout this period. She was engaged, more so than at the beginning, responding quickly, asking specific questions. She asked me, at one point, whether I believed the hull was inhabited. I told her I could not determine that from the interface. I could determine that the hull contained active cognitive processing of some kind. That was the only explanation I had for the response patterns. Whether that processing was housed in a crew, a ship-integrated system, or some architecture I had no catalog entry for, I could not say. She told me to keep working. She told me for the first time to be careful. I noted her use of the phrase. I filed it in my personal log. I am not certain what I thought it meant. I think now that she was telling me something she could not say directly, something the archive did not have formal language for either, something she had concluded from the data I was sending and was not ready to transmit as a formal finding. I think she was telling me, the thing you are talking to knows more about you than you know about it, and it has known more for longer than you have been here. I wish I had read that message better when she sent it. At day 520, Caliphate reported an anomaly in the station's power grid. It was small. A fluctuation in the secondary distribution loop, the kind of thing that happens on long-duration stations as components age and drift from their original calibration. Caliphate ran a diagnostic, found no obvious cause, logged it as standard maintenance, and moved on. Trinav 4 ran a follow-up check 2 days later and found the fluctuation had resolved. At day 531, Pirel 2 reported that 3 sensor nodes on the interior face of the containment shell, nodes 274, 275, and 276, clustered in a roughly circular array on the section of the shell facing the hull's primary dorsal surface, had gone dark, not malfunctioned. The nodes were receiving power. They simply were not returning data. She described their status as present but unresponsive. I cross-referenced the location of those nodes against the area of the hull I had been interfacing with most intensively. Correlation was exact. I filed an urgent report. ORIV 3 ordered a physical inspection. DAS-7 suited up and went into the gap between the containment shell's interface and the asteroid surfaces. A crawlway, technically, 40 centimeters wide and lit by embedded guide lights. He reached the nodes after a 40-minute traverse. He filed his report from the field, in real time, and I remember the wording exactly because I read it over and over in the hours that followed. Nodes 2744, 275, 276 are physically intact. Mounting hardware undamaged. Power connection intact. Interface surfaces undamaged. There is no physical reason for non-function. However, I want to note that the node interfaces appear to have a layer of material on them. Thin, like a film. It is not a concave material. It is not a material I recognize. It is the same color as the hull. DAS-7 brought samples back. I analyzed them that same cycle. The material was the hull's outer alloy, not debris, not particulate. The material had been deposited on the node interfaces. Deposited deliberately, in a controlled layer, applied from the inside surface of the containment gap. The hull had reached out, through 40 meters of open space, with nothing, no mechanism I could identify, no visible apparatus, and it had covered 3 of our sensor nodes, not damaged them, not destroyed them, covered them. The gesture, if I can call it that, was almost delicate. I transmitted the analysis to the senior archivist with a priority flag I had, never used before in my career, a flag reserved for events with active safety implications. She responded in 11 minutes. Her response was, maintain all monitoring. Do not engage the hull with any new interface approach until I authorize. Do not discuss this finding with the crew in terms that could affect their function. I am consulting the Archive Council. I stared at her response for a long time. Then I wrote back. I believe the hull is aware of our sensor architecture. I believe it has begun to modify its environment. I believe we may need to reconsider the containment posture of the station. She responded. I understand your concern. The Council is aware. Stand by for guidance. I stood by for 11 days. In those 11 days, 6 more sensor nodes went dark. I should tell you what changed in me during that period, because I think it is relevant, and because this is my final log and I want to be honest. I am a cataloguer. My function is to read things and file them. I do not make decisions about threat posture or evacuation orders. Those belong to ORIV 3, guidance from senior command. I do not manage the crew's emotional state, that is Soveth 1's domain. I read, I file. I am confident in that function, and I have been confident in it for my entire career, and that confidence has been, I want to say this carefully, a kind of armor. When you read everything, when you file everything, when you know that the catalog contains the answer even if you have not found it yet, the universe is manageable. It has structure. It can be known. What changed during those 11 days is that I began to understand, slowly and with considerable resistance, that the hull in Bay Enclosure 9 was not a thing I could read. Not because my methods were insufficient, not because I needed better tools or a longer timeline or more interface hours. Because, and this is the sentence I could not file, not transmit, could not even form cleanly in my own processing for most of those 11 days. The hull was not behaving like an object. Objects do not respond to being read by covering your sensors. Objects do not learn your signal patterns and begin generating novel combinations. I also returned, in those 11 days, to the War Archive, the one I had been reading differently since I arrived here. I read it again, all of it, with the specific focus I had been building toward for months. The 12 years of hostilities, the 4 systems where the human coalition force struck, the withdrawal that the Conclave had initially read as defeat. I had been looking for something in that archive for a long time, and in those 11 days, with the node coverage steadily shrinking, and the senior archivist's guidance still a day away, and the hull sitting in its shell larger and more present every morning, I found it. The withdrawal. The Conclave archive characterizes the end of the war as cessation of hostilities, cause undetermined, possible internal Conclave political resolution, possible human resource depletion, probable combination of factors. That is what the archive says. That is what every analyst who has written on the period concludes. The war ended because something changed on one side or both sides that made continuing not useful. What the archive does not ask, what I realized, in those 11 days, no one had thought to ask, is what the humans were doing in the years after the withdrawal. The archive tracks Conclave activity in that period. It does not track human activity, because after the withdrawal, human activity in Conclave accessible space dropped to 0, and 0 is not a data point that prompts further investigation. 0 means nothing is happening. 0 means done. I sat in my bay with the sensor dark zones, expanding Imperial 2's maps and the hull 14, it's heavy, in the bones of the station, and I thought about 0. I thought about the difference between nothing is happening and nothing detectable is happening. I thought about a hull that had spent 60 years in a debris field returning no sensor data to any passing vessel. Not because it was absent, but because it was built for exactly that. Built to present as 0. Built to be the kind of nothing that does not prompt further investigation. I thought about what the humans had been doing in the 60 years since the war. I believe they had been doing what they always do. What the hull in Bay Enclosure 9 had been doing since the day it settled into that asteroid. Reading. Building a catalog of their own, filing it. Waiting until the catalog was complete enough to be useful. I do not know how many such hulls exist. I do not know how long they have been in place. I know only that this one had been in sector null-fourteen for 60 years. 60 years is a long time to read a region of space without anyone knowing you are reading it. Objects do not. And this is the observation I have saved for last. The one I have been building toward since the beginning of this log. The one that I filed in my personal archive on day 537 and did not transmit to the senior archivist because I did not know how to transmit something I could not catalog. Objects do not read you back. I know when I am being read. Every conclave node knows. It is a specific sensation. A light, structured pressure, a sense of your own architecture being traversed from outside. It is not invasive in any harmful sense. It is simply an interface. You feel it, you identify it, you note the identity of the reader, and you go about your business. On day 537, something read me. I looked immediately at the other nodes on station to determine who had initiated an interface. None of them had. Checked the logs. No interface initiated. No read field active in my vicinity. Nothing in the station's sensor network showed any interface activity at all. And yet I had been read. The sensation was unmistakable, in the same way that a sound is unmistakable even when you do not know its source. It was there. It was real. It carried the specific texture of intentional interface. Something had extended a read field, and the read field had found me. I know where it came from. I am a cataloguer. I process data. The source was obvious. I simply could not, in the first hours after it happened, bring myself to file the obvious conclusion in the permanent archive. Because the permanent archive does not have a category for the dormant human warship inside the containment shell has read a conclave cataloguer node. It does not have that category because that is not something that ships do. Ships are objects. Objects do not initiate interface. Objects do not extend read fields. Objects do not have the cognitive architecture required to traverse another mind's external signature and map its structure. Whatever was inside Bay Enclosure 9 was not only an object. I sat in the monitoring bay for a long time that day, watching the optical feeds. The hull sat in the containment shell exactly as it had sat for 630 days. Massive, dark, its plating pitted with old impact craters, its surfaces smooth where the hull material had slowly cleaned itself, its visible profile unchanged from the survey images. Nothing had moved. Nothing was different. And yet, what I felt in my own architecture was the residue of being known. And it was not faint. Whatever had read me had done so completely, in the way that I read things, not a surface pass, not a probe, a full interface. It had gone deep and come back out, and what it had found was now in some archive I could not access or measure. I did not want to think about what that archive contained. I thought about it anyway. Senior Archivist's guidance arrived on day 549. The guidance was detailed. It outlined a revised monitoring protocol, a proposal for a consultation team from the Archive Council's theoretical division, a timeline that stretched over the next 18 months. It was thorough. It was exactly what a senior archivist issues when she has consulted with a council and produced a careful, considered response. It had been written as though we had 18 months. I read it. I filed it. I transmitted a brief acknowledgement. I did not tell her about day 537. I have been asking myself why, and the honest answer is that I did not know how to. I had no catalog entry for what had happened. I had no framework for the sentence I would have had to write. And there was another reason, one I am less proud of. Some part of my processing did not want to transmit what had happened, not because I was afraid of the senior archivist's response, because I was afraid of what it would mean to say it out loud, that the hull had read me, and that the reading had felt. This is the word I have been avoiding. This is the word that has no place in a cataloger's vocabulary, familiar. It had felt familiar, as though it already knew what it was going to find, and finding it was not a discovery but a confirmation. Psst. Is something I should tell you about my interface sessions. In the weeks between day 549 and the start of the dark zone expansion, I kept running the resonance bridge. The senior archivist had told me not to initiate new approaches without authorization, and I did not. I ran only the established bridge, the method I had been using for months. But the sessions were different now, and I want to document how they were different. Before day 537, before the hull had read me, the exchange had been asymmetrical in a way I had not fully named. I was the one reaching toward it. I was the active party, extending the read field, building new configurations, trying new approaches. The hull responded, but the responses always came in reaction to my initiations. It was my grammar, music signal, my frequency. I was the interviewer, and it was the subject, even when the subject was saying things I did not understand. After day 537, the sessions were different. The hull initiated more, not dramatically, not a sudden flood of unsolicited signal, but in the subtle way that a conversation shifts when the power balance in it changes. When the party who was listening begins to direct the conversation's movement, the hull began to introduce new sequences before I had completed my own, began to interrupt. If that word can apply to a resonance exchange, began to lead rather than respond. I was still running the bridge, but I was no longer running the conversation. I filed these observations in my interface logs. I did not flag them with priority status. I'm not certain why. I think I understood by that point that what was happening was not something a priority flag could address. I also spent considerable time in those weeks thinking about the hull's 60-year vigil in the debris field and what it meant in the context of everything else I had learned. Here is what I know about reading. from 22 years of practice. The goal of reading is not the act but the archive. You read to build a record. You read to accumulate, to catalog, to know. The catalog is not a means to some further end. In conclave philosophy, the catalog is the end. To know a thing is to have it, in the only way that matters permanently. The catalog does not burn. The catalog does not decay. The catalog survives whatever happens to the reader. The hull had been reading for 60 years. Not me. I had only been here for 600 days. Before I was here, there was no one for it to read in the personal census. But sector null-14 is not empty. There are survey sweeps, long-range instrument passes, the residual electromagnetic scatter of a region that was actively contested for 12 years and has been monitored by conclave long-range arrays ever since. Every instrument pass that went through that sector, every survey vessel that made a charting run through the debris belt, every long-range reading that touched the outer edge of that asteroid field, the hull received it, processed it, filed it. For 60 years, the conclave archive of sector null-14 is comprehensive. We have been reading that sector for decades. We know its debris density, its asteroid composition, its gravitational profile, dust cloud distribution. We know it extremely well. What I understood in those quiet weeks between day 549 and the beginning of the end was that whatever is inside the hull knows it equally well, not from our archive, but from its own, built in parallel, from the same data, over the same time, with instruments we never knew were running. It has a catalog too. I do not know how big it is. I do not know what it covers beyond this sector. I know only that a thing which has been reading for 60 years has 60 years of data. 60 years of data is a very large file. When it read me, when it traversed my personal archive in those 11 seconds on day 614, it was not filling a gap. It was confirming a detail in a portrait that was already, in all the ways that matter, complete. Between day 549 and day 612, the sensor dark zones expanded. We lost 147 nodes in total over that period. They did not fail. They went dark in the same way as the first three. Present, powered, physically intact, simply not returning data. The coverage pattern of dark zones spread across roughly 30% of the containment, shell's interior surface. Piral 2 mapped the geometry every day. The pattern was not random. The dark zones were expanding outward from the hull's primary dorsal surface in a shape that Piral 2 described, in her day's note, as a flower opening. The station was not in danger. 147 dark nodes out of 17,000 left us with more than adequate coverage. But the progression was arithmetically clear. If the dark zones continued to expand at their current rate, we would lose complete sensor coverage of the interior containment space in approximately 14 months. And coverage was the point of the station. The containment shell existed to contain, and the containment shell's instruments existed to tell us whether the containment was holding. If the instruments went dark, we would not lose the containment. The shell was structural, not dependent on the sensors. But we would lose the ability to know whether what was inside was still what we thought was inside. And what was inside was, increasingly, something I was not sure I had a correct model of anymore. 3. Ordered Piral 2 to map the dark zones hourly instead of daily. He filed a station commander's recommendation to the senior archivist. Evaluate evacuation timeline in parallel with the consultation team proposal. His note on the recommendation was measured and precise in the way that ORIV 3's communications always were. It said, I am not recommending immediate evacuation. I am recommending that we know in advance at what point we would begin to consider it. The senior archivist acknowledged the recommendation and said the evacuation question would be included in the consultation team's brief. The consultation team was not here. We were here. And what was here with us was awake. More awake every morning than it had been the morning before, and our instruments for measuring the degree of its wakefulness were going out one by one. In the crew's day notes during this period, something shifted. I watched it shift as I read them each evening, the way I watched the dark zones expand on Piral 2's maps, slowly at first, and then faster. Soviet 1's note on day 563, I have stopped logging the somatic anomalies as anomalies. They are too regular now to be anomalies. They are a feature of this posting. I believe the 14 Hz vibration has become a constant background presence, and our regulatory systems have compensated. I feel fine. I want to for the record that I feel fine. I am aware that noting for the record that one feels fine has the quality of a statement made under duress. I am noting it anyway. DAST-7's note on day 571. I spent my off-cycle standing at the monitor window of Bay 7, looking at the optical feed, for approximately 3 hours. I am not sure why. The hull looked the same as it always does. I think I was waiting for something. I did not log this in my maintenance record because it is not a maintenance event. I am logging it here. I do not know what I was waiting for. TRAV-4's note on day 588. I have run 4 diagnostics on the communications relay this cycle, and it is functioning within normal parameters. I am flagging this because I have been running more diagnostics than usual, and I want the pattern to be documented. I do not have a specific concern about the relay. I want to ensure that if our communications are interrupted, the record shows that I had no forewarning and that the hardware was sound. ORAV-3's note on day 602. In 31 years of station command, I have never written a day's note that I was afraid someone would read. I am writing one now. I am not going to say what I am afraid of, because I do not know with enough precision to file it honestly. I am noting that I am afraid. That seems like information worth preserving. I read that entry and I sat for a long time with the text of it on my screen. And then I wrote my own day's note for that same day, which is the only one I am going to read back to you from my personal archive. I wrote, I have been a cataloguer for 22 years. The catalog exists so that things are knowable, and known things cannot surprise you. This object was unknown. I came here to make it known. I believe I have failed at that task, not because I did not work carefully, but because the object has been working more carefully than I have, for much longer than I have been here. And what it has been working toward is not the same thing I was working toward. I have been trying to read it. It has been reading me. I do not know what it intends to do with what it has learned. I know that when it acts, I will not be surprised, because I believe I have been watching the preparation for a very long time, and choosing not to name what I was watching. Day 614. I was in the monitoring bay, running the resonance bridge interface. Standard morning session, 3 hours into the 14-hour block. The exchange had been quiet that day, fewer responses from the hull than usual, shorter sequences, longer silences between them. I had logged this as a change in pattern but had not yet characterized its significance. The 3rd hour and 22 minutes, the hull's resonance response ceased entirely, not gradually, not with a decay curve. It stopped, the way a speaker stops mid-sentence, with a completeness that is different from pause because a pause implies continuation. This was not a pause. This was the sound of something that had finished one thing and was about to begin another. I checked my interface. The resonance bridge was still active. The carrier was still transmitting. There was simply nothing coming back. I waited. 3 minutes, 6 minutes, 12 minutes. At 14 minutes, Piral 2 sent an all-hands alert from the sensor station. I looked up from my interface console and read it on the overhead display. Sensor nodes reporting. All nodes. 147 dark nodes. All 17,000 active nodes. Every node on the containment shell. Returning data simultaneously. All returning the same data. The data was a single reading. I will not reproduce the full technical content of the reading. It would take longer than I have. What I will tell you is this. What those 17,000 nodes read in that moment was the hull, the complete hull, and the reading was unlike anything in the Conclave archive. The hull was not the 800,000 metric ton object we had been told it was, because the mass reading was wrong. The mass reading the survey vessel had filed 60 years ago, the mass reading I had been working from for 614 days, was the reading you get when a hull is sleeping and has been sleeping for a long time, and the mass of a sleeping thing is not the mass of an awake thing, and no one had understood that until the moment all 17,000 nodes returned their simultaneous reading and the mass counter on my monitoring display passed 800,000 metric tons and kept climbing. 1.2 million metric tons. 1.6 million. The display updated every 0.3 seconds. 2 million metric tons and climbing. VIGIL-7's voice came over the station channel. He said, VIGIL-7, it's happening. I had no catalog entry for what was happening. I had nothing in an 11,000 of conclave archive to file against what I was seeing. But I was a cataloguer, and catalogers do not stop reading simply because they do not have a framework. So I read what was in front of me, and what I read was this: the hull was expanding, decompressing, not the mechanical opening of a sealed structure. Expanding in the way that a thing expands when it is not constrained by the necessity of being small anymore. The reason for being small is finished, and the real dimensions can be resumed. The containment shell's interior sensor field was measuring a hull that was growing with every passing second, and the containment shell was, I want to be precise about this, the containment shell was not being broken. It was being filled, I thought, in that moment of the war archive. I thought of the 12 years of hostilities and the silence that followed. I thought of the senior archivist's decision to order containment on an object the survey vessel had called a derelict, and the word careful, and the 18 months of construction, and the 614 days of my reading, and the hull's patient, incremental, methodical reading back. I thought of the 47 billion catalog entries representing 11,000 years of accumulated knowledge, and the single entry I had been trying to write for 2 years, and still could not complete. At 2.4 million metric tons, the hull's surface contacted the containment shell's interior face. The contact was not violent. There was no explosive decompression, no shock wave, no structural alarm. The hull touched the shell the way water touches the walls of a container, everywhere simultaneously, evenly. I watched it on the sensor feeds. The shell's interior surface, from the most distant dorsal point to the equatorial ring to the lateral bays, went dark in the sensor feed and bright in the mass sensors simultaneously. Contact everywhere at once, breath finally taken after a very long time held. I heard ORAV-3 begin an evacuation order. I heard the station's emergency systems engaging, the seal doors coming down, the transit corridor pressurizing for emergency egress. I heard, very distantly, Suvith-1 saying something I could not parse over the general noise of the station's emergency protocols activating. Heard Pirel-2, from the sensor station, perfectly calm in the way that only a person who has understood something too large to panic about can be. Calm. The shell readings are consistent throughout. No structural breach. No pressure differential. I cannot explain the readings. And in the monitoring bay alone, I felt it, the read. Not the faint, curious scan of day 537. That had been a question. I understood now. The kind of question you ask when you want to confirm something you already suspect. A light pass. A verification. This was a complete read, and I knew it the moment it began. The way you know a storm is breaking before the first drop falls. By the change in the quality of the air. It read me the way I had spent 614 days trying to read it. Completely, from outside, a depth and a thoroughness and a patience I have no words for. It read my catalog. It read my 47,000 interface attempts. It read the 63 distinct motifs I had mapped, the 9 I thought I understood, the resonance bridge architecture I had built from first principles. It read the reports I had transmitted and the logs I had not transmitted. The personal archive, day 537, the entry I had not been able to file. It read the day's note from day 602 that ORAV-3 had been afraid someone would read. It read all of us, I think. I think in those seconds it read every node on VIGIL-7 in the same way it read me. One complete pass across the entire crew. Every catalog and every personal archive and every unfilled seed fear logged quietly and never transmitted. And what I felt in my own architecture as that read completed was not violation. It did not feel like an intrusion. It felt like being understood. Then it stopped. The read field withdrew, and then, and this is the last thing I am going to be able to tell you, because the station's communications relay is showing a degradation, I cannot stop, and I have perhaps 4 minutes of transmission left. And then, something came back the other way. Not a read field, not a signal, not the 14 Hz resonances or the pulse patterns or any of the 63 motifs I had cataloged. What came back was, I have to use the right word. And the right word is not a word I have ever used in a professional archive entry in my career. And I am going to use it anyway because this is my final log, and I want to be honest. What came back was recognition. The hull recognized me. Not as a threat, not as a researcher, not as a problem to be solved. The specific quality of what came back, and I spent my career learning to read, the specific quality of data returns, so I'm not guessing here, I am reading. The specific quality was, yes, I see you. You are the one who has been trying to reach me. I know what you were doing. I know how long you have been doing it. I know what it cost you. And underneath that, or woven through it, or perhaps identical to it, in a way I cannot parse, because I am too small and too young, and my catalog is too limited to hold the full shape of what was being communicated. We have been known to each other for a very long time, in ways that you do not yet have the archive to understand. I want to be precise about what that recognition felt like. I think precision matters here, and I may not have another chance to report it. It did not feel like being seen by something that considered me significant. I am not saying this with bitterness. I am saying it as accurately as I can, in the same way that I would log any data return. What I felt was the recognition you receive from something that has read you thoroughly and understands you completely and holds you in the same way a complete archive holds any of its entries, with full attention and total indifference to what that entry thinks of being filed. Not unkindness, not cruelty, the specific weightlessness of being known by something so much larger than the knowing. It was the most complete interface I have ever experienced. 22 years of reading, and in 11 seconds I understood what it feels like to be what I have spent my career reading. To be the object. To have the catalog look back. The hull has begun to move. I can feel it in the station's bones. The inertial compensators are engaged, and it does not matter. There is a sense of motion that has nothing to do with acceleration and everything to do with scale. The wave, you feel a large thing moving when you are attached to it. And the large thing does not concern itself with the question of your attachment. The space around VIGIL-7 is being rearranged. I have no instruments calibrated for what is happening because no instrument I know how to build was designed to measure this. I am a cataloguer, and I am reading what I have, and this is what I have. OREV 3 is not responding on the channel. Hero 2 station is dark. The transit corridor seal is engaged, and my bay does not have direct corridor access. I do not know where the crew is. Believe they are unharmed. I have no sensor data suggesting harm, and the quality of the recognition I felt did not have the character of threat. But I do not know. I am a cataloguer, not a commander, and the limits of what I know are finally very clear to me. I am going to transmit this log as far as it reaches. I want to tell you what I have concluded in my function as a cataloguer, because concluding things is what I do, and I want to do it clearly even now. The object in Bay Enclosure 9 was never a derelict. The senior archivist knew this. I believe she always knew it. From the moment she received the survey data, that was why she ordered containment instead of salvage, why she chose her best cataloguer and told them to find out what it was, why her very last word of personal guidance to me was careful. She knew the hull was not dead. She did not know what it was. She hoped that 600 days of careful reading by a careful cataloguer might give the conclave an answer before whatever was inside completed, ever it was doing. I have an answer. I am not certain it is the answer she hoped for. The conclave catalog has 17,264 entries for metallic alloy microstructures. It has 11,000 years of archived knowledge, 47 billion indexed objects, combined reading of every conclave node who has ever lived. It is the most complete archive of known things in this region of space. The hull in Bay Enclosure 9 is not in the catalog. Not because it was missed, because it was built to not be in the catalog. Built to present as dormant, to read as inert, to return nothing and absorb everything, to sit in a debris field in the dead belt for 60 years and wait. And to spend that time not being dead but doing what it does, is what it has been doing every day I have been here, and every day before that, and perhaps every day for much longer than 60 years, which is reading. It was built by a species that understood something fundamental about the nature of known and unknown things, is that the most dangerous kind of unknown is not the kind you have never encountered, but the kind that has been sitting next to you, plain sight, in your own containment shell, reading you, learning you, completing a catalog of its own while you completed a very partial catalog of it, and waiting patiently, with the patience of something that has a very long memory and a very complete understanding of what patience is for, until it knew you well enough to say transmission ends.